Welcome back. Next on our schedule this afternoon is a session with Adam Simmons, who's the Director of Future Road Investment Strategies and Government Relations at Highways England. Now, Adam's session is so hot off the press, he's had no time at all to prepare slides. He's going to talk without slides about a strategy that was announced only yesterday. So over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Lem. Good afternoon, everyone. Adam Simmons here from Highways England. I'm a director in our strategy and planning department with responsibility for our net zero carbon plan. As Lem said, I'm very proud to say that on Monday this week, Highways England published our net zero highways plan. And I'm very pleased to just say a little bit about that this afternoon, give a bit more detail about that, and I'll be around to answer any questions. So I think the first thing I wanted to say, just for those of you not aware, Highways England, we're the government company responsible for the operations, maintenance and enhancement of the strategic road network. That's England's motorways and major A roads. And in developing our net zero highways plan, I was very conscious that we face two potentially competing challenges, but I think in developing our plan, shown how they can complement each other. The first is we very much know that now in the UK, surface transport is the biggest emitter of carbon as a sector, and roads is the biggest contributor to those emissions. So the question that I think we all face working in highways is if we are serious about climate change, and it's quite clear that government is, companies like Highways England, companies like all of you represented here listening to this, are serious about climate change. If we're serious about climate change, why would we consider building more roads and potentially adding to those emissions? For me to look alongside that is then the challenge that says, well, roads are so fundamental to everyday lives, to the lives of individuals getting to work, receiving goods and services, or businesses and industry moving goods and services around the country, is how do we continue to ensure that roads can be the backbone of the economy, continue to support essential services for the country. Now, critically for me, we know that 4 million journeys a day happen across the motorways and A roads in England. 2/3 of freight moves around on our network. And those industries that are dependent on the strategic road network contribute over £300 billion in gross value added to the economy. And there's absolutely the potential for that economic contribution to grow. So I think for me, the focus of really having a net zero carbon plan for Highways England, very much complementing the direction of travel that government is moving, is about absolutely taking the carbon out of roads, out of road transport and road construction, so that a net zero economy can continue to be served and supported by a healthy and growing road network. In terms of Highways England's approach to that, we've set out in our plan 3 very stretching ambitions. It's around how we, by 2030, achieve net zero emissions in our own direct operations, our offices, our on-road lighting and so on. How by 2040 we achieve net zero for our construction and maintenance activities, and how we support the very rapid pace of decarbonisation that government is setting to get to net zero for road user emissions by 2050. So just taking each of those in turn, and then I want to say a little bit more specifically about the construction space, which I think will be of particular interest to this audience today. By 2030, Highways England as a company will achieve net zero, and by doing that we will be replacing up to 70% of our lighting on our network with LEDs. We have a fleet of vehicles, traffic officer vehicles, maintenance inspection vehicles, which will be moving over, or we've already moved over to plug-in hybrid electric, and we'll move over to electric vehicles. And by having actually some land alongside of our road network, we have the opportunity to lock up carbon through planting additional trees, but also we want to explore whether we can put photovoltaic cells to perhaps power roadside equipment or return electricity to the grid. By 2040, we want to achieve net zero emissions for all of our construction and maintenance activity. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but fundamentally that's about steadily increasing the amount of low and ultimately zero carbon products that we use in construction, be that construction materials, steel, concrete, asphalt, and so on, or indeed the zero carbon heavy plant and machinery that are used on site. We also want to work very much with the supply chain to think about best practice in carbon management. So using PAS 2080 principles, thinking about our design and our construction methods. So for example, thinking about how we can reduce HGV lorry movements to and from site, so we can reduce emissions from that source. But also we do want to maximize, get the most out of the existing network as well, about embracing digital, embracing new technologies that are able to effectively get more vehicles flowing through the network. And then the final area, as I said, government in last week publishing its decarbonising transport plan set a very rapid pace through setting regulation and legislation by which the vehicle fleet, the road user fleet, cars and light vans, but also HGVs, will be moved over from petrol and diesel through hybrids to electric or zero carbon vehicles, and have set a very rapid pace for doing that. And I think for me, critically, to a point at which by around the mid 2030s, per passenger emissions from roads could be on a par of what we see in per passenger emissions for rail and public transport at the moment. And I think that's a very good benchmark to be aiming for by that the mid 2030s. In Highways England, we absolutely want to support our customers who are using our network. Doing that, we're already helping to provide rapid charging facilities on or near our network. We want to work with government in their Project Rapid program to provide 6 rapid chargers at motorway service areas by 2023. And I think it's really important that we can help work with a number of providers to think about what's the blueprint for services that our customers will use. Not only thinking about having rapid chargers at the right places along the network, but perhaps acknowledging that there is a different experience for our customers in charging an electric vehicle compared to filling up a petrol or diesel vehicle. So what other services are provided in that services? Our plans are, we believe, ambitious. We've set out how we want to achieve those ambitions. Our targets are aligned to science-based targets, the Paris Agreement to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrialization levels. And our plans are designed to align to Committee on Climate Change's 6th carbon budget. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to say a little bit about some of the detail of that, and indeed some of the challenges that do remain. I'm under no illusion that we have a perfect plan, that if we follow everything, we know everything now, we'll get to net zero. We know there are some things that will still need work, and I'll say a little bit about that. The first thing I wanted to say was really about the nature of offsets, actually. And I think already we're in a very good place that Highways England, along with its construction partners, are already challenging ourselves to make our projects carbon neutral. So to get to as low carbon emissions as possible, around 50% perhaps where they might have been before, and then to offset those remaining emissions. I think that's an important step, but I really want to emphasize that that is not the end point here. Carbon neutrality is just a stepping stone. Where we want to get to is absolutely a point where emissions are brought down as low as possible, and there's only a very small amount of residual emissions that might be offset. And indeed, if we're thinking about those offsets, we'd perhaps try and do it with local projects and supporting local carbon capture. The second area I just wanted to touch on, which I alluded to before, is around materials. We know that currently there is no zero carbon concrete product, no zero carbon steel product, or zero carbon asphalt product. There are definitely lower carbon products of those, but we acknowledge that those lower carbon products have certain uses and perhaps they can't be used in other areas. And it's really important that we work together with manufacturers, with suppliers, and obviously as part of that as Highways England, to think about the standards that we set. And part of our plan is to say we want to be very transparent about what sort of products we are currently using and for what purpose. Critically though for us, I think by setting this plan and setting this pace of change, I think Highways England, we're, if you like, setting the expectation and saying we will be committed to using these sorts of products, which we hope gives that certainty to manufacturers and to suppliers to invest in developing these and developing how they can be used in construction. But it very much is a partnership approach, and that's very much what we want to be developing and working on with you all in the, from now over the immediate few years. I think we acknowledge that there's still a way to go to be really clear about how we're going to measure success. And there are a few different approaches that we might take, but I think what we want to do as an industry is to be able to say we want to make continuous improvement. So in our construction projects, we might look at the last 2, 3, 4 projects that we've done, which sets a benchmark. And then the next projects we take, we seek to better that by a certain percentage, for example. That sets a new benchmark, and we can seek to better that as we go on. But I think we need to be very clear about that approach and very clear about our expectations. And I think I'm very clear as well that to achieve our 2040 net zero construction target, it is about steady improvement as we go. So I think it's really important that we work with our partners to understand how best to do that and how best to communicate that. I touched on before that a good partnership to making sure our construction achieves net zero is to make sure we make the absolute best use of the existing network. We, of course, already operate and maintain our network to the best, to deliver the best service to our customers. But I believe as well we can invest in technologies to get even more benefits out of the existing network. Be that manufacturers, of course, bringing new technologies like emergency braking that helps smooth flows on the network. But for Highways England to really make sure that we're supporting that by providing the right roadside infrastructure and indeed potentially the right data infrastructure to ensure that those innovations that are being developed can be maximised, and indeed we can make most use of the capacity that we already have. I think the last thing I'd like to say is that undoubtedly there's a massive opportunity here. I strongly believe that along with Highways England, the whole of the highway supply chain, the construction supply chain, shares the commitment to achieve net zero, not only by 2050, but by achieving those earlier milestones as well. We know that there are a number of challenges along the way, and we need to work with government on those. But fundamentally, actually, trying to solve for carbon should also deliver cost efficiencies, productivity efficiencies, and there's a real opportunity there to think differently and think creatively about how we deliver. I think the programme that Highways England says sets that longer term certainty and ambition, not only in the programme of schemes taking forward, but of the requirements and the milestones that we want to hit as we achieve net zero. So I'm very proud of our publication from Monday this week. Very pleased to be able to talk about it in a bit more detail this afternoon. I'm very happy to take some questions now in Q&A, but please do follow up with me afterwards if there's anything you'd like to talk about in more detail after the event. Thank you, and back to Lem.
Well, thanks very much for that overview. That's fascinating stuff. The first question that occurs to me, having looked at the plan that was announced earlier this week, is it ambitious enough, really? If you look at the Committee on Climate Change has called for the whole of the construction industry to be decarbonised by 2040, if we're to achieve government goals. And a body like Highways England really is in a position to set the pace, really. Do you think this is a plan that will tighten as time goes by?
Yes, thank you. A great question. So you mentioned the Climate Change Committee and the sixth carbon budget, and absolutely right, saying that the construction and manufacturing industry should be net zero by 2040. And I think that was very much in our mind for setting that ambition. Actually acknowledge as well in the sixth carbon budget, it notes that there are some parts of manufacturing that may take a little longer, particularly really having a credible approach to carbon capture and storage for any residual emissions around particularly materials like steel, concrete and asphalt. So I think that's definitely an area that needs to be sort of developed further. But what we wanted to set out in our plans is exactly that sort of pace of ambition set by Climate Change Committee, science-based targets, that sort of pace. But critically, this isn't about sitting and doing nothing until just before 2040 ticks round, but taking action now, making that steady progress. But critically, I think Highways England, as a government company, is in an excellent position to say we can be at the forefront of wanting to use new heavy plant, for example, or new materials and how we use them in construction. Of course, balancing with safety concerns and other objectives we're trying to achieve. But I think what our plan does is set out a credible timescale about how we can get to 2040. So I think it is ambitious. I think 2040 for construction and maintenance. Of course, if collectively we can better that, then we should do. But I think even 2040 is a very ambitious target for us all to be working towards.
Thank you. There's a question here from Simon Flint. I think to paraphrase what he's asking about, to what extent is Highways England involved in efforts to try and move freight to more sustainable means of transport? A lot of diesel lorries pounding up and down our motorways, chucking out a lot of pollution, etc. What can you do to help to make that kind of business more sustainable?
Yes, and thank you, Simon, for the question. It's absolutely part of our plan. I think modal shift is very important, particularly in these early stages where the fleet has not decarbonised. So if we get to a point where we've achieved a large proportion of the fleet zero carbon HGVs, it's a slightly different picture. But in Highways England, we're already investing and working with companies like Network Rail, High Speed 2 Limited, to have better connections between road and rail to enable freight to get onto rail. And I think very much important that we work with subnational transport bodies as well to think about the parts of the journeys going into cities and urban areas. So we are investing in that, and we are supporting efforts for modal shift. I think one thing I'd recognise, though, is there's such a vast amount of freight that moves by road. I think 9 times more freight moves by road than by any other mode in this country, and sort of practically roads connect every point in the country, whereas a rail network perhaps has sort of limited connection points there. I think even if we were to effectively double rail capacity for freight, it would only have a small number of percentage sort of impact on the freight on road. So I absolutely believe, and we're absolutely committed to supporting modal shift. Equally, we know that freight movements by road are so critical to the economy and so sort of important that is why we're supporting the government efforts to decarbonise HGVs, to support the trials that are already taking place with led by government, and to think about what infrastructure needs there might be to support the different technologies, because I'm conscious that there are several technologies out there for HGV, low carbon HGVs, and that's still an area to be developed. So I hope that answers your question.
I hope so too. A question from Robert Woods at Burrows. What are your thoughts on alternative road construction techniques, such as the use of recycled plastics? I know tarmac or asphalt's been around a long time. I think it was invented by accident as well, when a barrel of tar was spilled. But what are your thoughts in terms of next generation materials? Are they going to make a big difference from your perspective?
I think they absolutely have to, and have to be a really important part of the overall plan and overall approach. You mentioned recycled plastics. I think that's important. I think actually there are a number of benefits here. I know for a recent A590 renewals project, a lot of the materials were recycled back into the road and sort of neighbouring projects. To minimise, freight movements, or minimise bringing in more materials. But as you quite rightly say, there are other quite innovative approaches, and I'm aware of an example of using, I think, recycled tyres for surfacing that could be used in emergency areas, for example. I think that presents a challenge for Highways England to meet. I think we need to be fleet of foot to work with manufacturers, people who are developing these innovative approaches, to think about how we can, apply the right processes to ensure they meet the various standards, but do so with appropriate pace and with an appropriate approach that really looks to think about how they can be used in construction, and to respond quickly to help those products come to market, to be put on the catalogue and allow them to be used. And why it's important for me, actually, as part of our plan, is that we're able to say what sort of innovative new materials can be used for different sorts of projects. I'm quite conscious that some materials, for example, may not be appropriate for long life, sort of heavy load bearing structures, for example, but could absolutely be used for vehicle restraint systems or drainage. So I think it's really important rather, that we're clear on that, but absolutely support the being able to support new materials coming to market in this space.
I guess there's also the consideration you want to make sure that whatever you move to doesn't create unforeseen problems. We know there's an issue with microplastics. Putting plastics into the road surface is bound to create microplastics and create a problem there, I would imagine. So that sort of innovation would have to be done carefully. Another question from Mark Stokes at Kia. How have innovations to pavement surfaces helped increase vehicle efficiency and also help to drive down the embodied carbon, I think, of the road surface? I think he's asking about that.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure there's much more to sort of say about that, and I think there are a lot of considerations here. Lem, you just sort of quite rightly pointed out that we must make sure there's not unintended consequences. I think the spirit's got to be to look at these with open minds, look at the opportunities that innovative materials present. There's an interesting example that sort of was brought to light to me, which is modern vehicles, for example, with new technologies for staying within the white lines and not crossing the white lines. Obviously have important safety considerations, but in keeping vehicles to a very narrow route there, you get much more prone to kind of grooves forming, which I know is a big issue for motorcyclists. So again, I think it's embracing the innovations, but understanding the implications for them. That should not be a barrier to them being used. But I do take your point, Lem, that we do need to understand all the consequences of these. And I think it raises a point for me, which is carbon. It's about carbon sort of being much higher up the agenda as a consideration in various investment decisions, but equally it's got to be made still alongside safety and other considerations as well.
Well, thanks very much, Adam. That's some excellent insights there. A really helpful session. We are out of time.